once again he shifted the responsibility onto the Europeans. Donald Trump is ready to impose sanctions against Russia, but only after all NATO countries do so first. He wrote about this on his social network, Truth Social. The US president stated that the alliance must act decisively and should refuse to import Russian oil, and also to impose tariffs of 50 to 100% on goods from China, because it is Beijing that has a strong influence on Russia. Trump also emphasized that the war in Ukraine is not his war, this is a quote, but Biden's and Zelensky's. And he called on NATO to make decisions quickly in order to stop further casualties.
And a few hours ago, Donald Trump made another statement regarding the incidents when Russian drones crossed NATO borders. My patience with Putin is running out very quickly. The US president stated this earlier on the Fox and Friends program. Let us recall that he previously called the appearance of drones on Polish territory a likely mistake. He claimed that the drones went out of control when they were being shot down. Now, however, Trump has agreed that more pressure should be put on Russia, according to Politico, citing sources. But the US and the EU, it is said, differ in their methods. We'll talk more about this with TSN's own correspondent in the United States. Ola Koshelenko should be live with us in the studio right now. Olya, welcome. Here you are. Trump's patience keeps running out, but somehow never actually runs out. Can we now expect any real steps from the White House towards the Kremlin? And what is this conflict or misunderstanding or these discussions with the EU that Politico is actually writing about?
Tasha, first of all, the context here is very important. Specifically, how did Trump say that his patience with Putin is running out? He actually repeated a phrase from a question asked by the host of Fox and Friends, where the president was on air this morning. The host asked him, "Mr. President, is your patience with Putin running out?" And the answer was, "It is running out, and very quickly." But in fact, just the day before, Trump called it a likely mistake that Russian drones entered NATO territory in Poland. At least 19 of them, by the way. But the President of the United States stated that he was informed it could have been a mistake that happened when the drones were being shot down. Today, Trump once again resorted to rhetoric, claiming that both Zelensky and Putin are to blame for the war not ending. I suggest we listen to a fragment of his response about patience from the broadcast.
So, is your patience running out?
Yes, it seems to be running out, and it's running out quickly. But it takes two to tango. It's incredible. When Putin wanted to do it, Zelensky didn't. When Zelensky wanted to, Putin didn't. Now Zelensky wants to, and as for Putin, that's a question mark. But we will have to act very, very forcefully.
Also, in his important speech delivered today, President Donald Trump explicitly stated that imposing significant sanctions on both the banking and energy systems could potentially provide substantial assistance. And he has been repeating this for some time now. He says that the European Union also needs to take measures regarding the Russians, for example, that they are buying Russian oil products and their policy. Today, an article came out under the headline, "Trump finally wants to put pressure on Russia." But now comes the hardest part. The article states that this week there have been high-level contacts among senior officials of the EU and the United States. And a delegation from the EU even came here to Washington, where they held negotiations. The point is that Trump wants the European Union to impose tariffs on India and China, which are buying Russian oil products. But the European Union has a different approach. They would still prefer direct sanctions against Russia. And this supposedly is where the conflict lies. And now both sides are actively trying to figure out precisely how to appropriately act in this complex and evolving situation. Let me continue with a quote from Politico.
This week, the US president told EU officials that he wants to impose a 100% tariff on Russian energy purchases by India and China, provided that Brussels follows suit. However, this is economically and politically impossible for the EU. Such a move would contradict the fundamental principles of the EU, especially after European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen reiterated her opposition to tariffs, insisting that tariffs are taxes on domestic consumers. Imposing tariffs on India, with whom Brussels is close to concluding an important trade agreement, and on China, on which its open economy heavily depends, would amount to a colossal act of self-harm.
And next week, the President of the United States will be in Europe. More specifically, he plans to visit the United Kingdom, and perhaps these issues will be discussed in more detail there. A celebration.
Olya, one more question. In America right now, I suspect this is one of the top topics. the murder of blogger and activist Charlie Kirk. And why has this crime become so much the focus of the American authorities? Even President Trump himself announced on the air today that a suspect had been detained.
Yes, Holiday. The suspect was indeed detained and was announced this morning. He is a 22-year-old local resident, Tyler Robinson. He was apprehended with the help of his own father, who recognized his son from photos distributed by the FBI, as well as a local priest. According to law enforcement, Robertson had recently, as they put it, taken an interest in politics. And on the rifle from which allegedly this single fatal shot was fired in Utah, it was engraved, "Hey, fascists, catch this." But all of this still needs to be clarified in detail. This blogger was a close friend of the Vice President of the United States, J.D. Vance. Together with his wife, Usha, they accompanied Kirk's body the day before on Air Force Two, the plane used by the Vice President of the United States. Usha Vance walked down the ramp hand in hand with Kirk's widow, Erica, while Vance himself symbolically joined in carrying the coffin from the plane. President Trump also considers Kirk to be a close friend of his. He was adored by Barron, Trump's son, and even, as Trump recounted on Fox and Friends, asked his father to arrange a meeting with his favorite blogger, after which he was absolutely thrilled with this person. And now Trump has promised to posthumously award Kirk the highest civilian honor, the Medal of Freedom, and also to attend the funeral. He also said on Fox and Friends that he hopes for the highest possible punishment for the killer. As is known in the United States, this is the death penalty. As a popular blogger, Kirk helped Trump secure victory in the last presidential election. Even Trump himself acknowledges this in the swing state of Arizona, where Kirk lived. Kirk consistently advocated for traditional Republican values, including the fundamental right to freely own firearms. And by the way, he spoke extremely negatively and quite vocally about U.S. financial assistance to Ukraine in particular. He would frequently repost President Zelensky's tweets, sincerely thanking the United States for their substantial help, and then quite pointedly write, "No, we are absolutely not helping you, and we do not support you in any way."
Thank you for helping to sort all this out, as always. Special correspondent for TSN in the United States, Olha Koshelenko, on the White House's reaction to the latest news from Europe and the murder of pro-Trump activist Charlie Kirk. And we return to the topic of the crash. After Russian drones appeared in Poland, NATO plans to launch a new mission to strengthen the defense of the eastern flank. This became known today after a press conference at the alliance headquarters attended by Secretary General Mark Rutte and the commander of the combined forces, General Alexis Grinkovich. The military operation will begin in the coming days and will involve a number of the bloc's allies. Meanwhile, Poland has decided to close all border checkpoints with Belarus due to the Russian-Belarusian military exercises. The West 2025 exercises, which started today, will continue until September 16th. Do people in Europe see a threat of an attack from Russia, considering that everything started with exercises for Ukraine back in 2022? Let's find out from Radio Svoboda correspondent Zoriana Stepanenko. She is now live from the TSN studio. Zoriana, hello. Joint exercises between Russia and Belarus, and right before that, this drone incident over Poland. Is Europe currently considering all of this together overall, and what is the current level of concern in the West?
Hello, indeed. The Russian drones in Polish airspace have really heightened tensions. Their downing was called a success by the alliance back on Wednesday, and they continue to insist on this today, despite all the criticism and uncomfortable questions. A handful of cheap Russian drones, 24 to be exact, were countered by weapon systems worth millions of euros. If, for example, one day the alliance is attacked by 800 drones, as Ukraine was in a single strike, it would exhaust its arsenals within a few weeks, said one unnamed EU official to Radio Liberty, expressing concern about this fact. What outraged her most was the result itself. Out of 19 drones, as you may recall, the alliance forces shot down only 4 on Wednesday. Meanwhile, Ukraine, during much larger attacks involving hundreds of drones, reports intercepting the vast majority of them. Nevertheless, as today's press conference showed, NATO still considers its work in Poland to be successful, and they will continue to strengthen their eastern flank. To this end, they announced a new initiative called Eastern Watch. Mark Rutte said that it is up to Wymyślew to solve the problems created by drones, particularly the issues of cost, and he responded by rejecting all accusations from the NATO forces commander in Europe.
All efforts are aimed at ensuring that we receive cheaper weapons that we can use for self-defense. Let me make one last comment. When a fighter pilot is in the air or someone on the ground is defending the alliance, I don't want them to be thinking about how much their weapons cost. I want them to protect our citizens.
Ukraine is at war, so naturally everything Ukraine does, using its capabilities, is aimed at countering direct, daily, and in a certain sense, predictable acts of aggression. Of course, NATO allies are not at war. Therefore, the level of readiness of our troops, the capabilities of our air forces, are not at the highest level. So it would be strange if Ukraine resisted the Russian attack worse than Poland, Lithuania, or Finland.
However, Reuters has reported that Polish military personnel will be trained by their Ukrainian counterparts on how to effectively shoot down drones. And against this backdrop, joint Russian-Belarusian exercises are taking place right next to Poland. Minsk claims these exercises are defensive in nature, while the Polish Ministry of Defense considers them offensive. Among the maneuvers are drills involving a nuclear strike and the Oreshnik complex. The Polish authorities believe that one of the objectives of these exercises is to practice an attack on the Suwałki corridor, which connects Poland and Lithuania and is located between Belarus and Russia's Kaliningrad region. Because of its geography, the corridor is considered a vulnerable spot on NATO territory and therefore a potential target. And that's why Warsaw is deploying about 40,000 soldiers on its eastern borders. In this way, they are anticipating possible risks, as a Polish expert and former NATO official explained to us.
We have seen in the past how exercises were used as a pretext for massing troops before attacks on Georgia, Ukraine, and so on. Many times in the past, troops that, for example, arrived from Russia to Belarus for exercises ended up staying there. Do these exercises themselves pose a threat? Probably not. But we are closely monitoring any provocations. The scale of this event is relatively small.
The Kremlin sees no reason for Europe to be concerned. Because of the exercises, Dmitry Peskov spoke about the emotional strain in Europe and assured that Russia does not pose a threat to it. I would like to remind you here that Moscow similarly denied plans to attack Ukraine when, at the end of 2021, tens of thousands of Russian troops had already gathered near its borders. There are no signs that this will be repeated now on a different scale. At least the Allies do not see any.
Thank you. Radio Liberty correspondent Zariana Stepanenko reported live on TSN about how Europe is preparing to strengthen the eastern defense flank.